No, good afternoon, everyone. I'm clearly not quite as sharp as I thought I was this afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. This is today's scrutiny board for adults' health and active lifestyles. I hope you will enjoy this scrutiny board meeting. We've got some really important topics on the agenda today. As always, in terms of this, just to remind everyone, this is webcast live. So my little faux pas earlier will be public information soon enough. My name is Andrew Scotes. I'm a councillor for Beeson Holbeck and I'm chair of this board. We're going to start with introductions. We'll go around the table and then we'll get into the meat of the meeting. Okay, so we'll go this way. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Mohammed Iqbal for Hansleton Riverside Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor France Mear for Moortown and Meanwood.
Good afternoon, I'm John Beale. I chair Health Watch Leeds and I'm a co-opted member of this board.
Good afternoon, Councillor Taylor, and I represent Chapel Allerton Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Kevin Ritchie, and I represent Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Luke Farley, Labour Councillor for Bermondsey and Richmond Hill.
I'm Councillor Fiona Benham. I'm the Executive Board Member for Children's Social Care and Health Partnerships.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor David Jenkins. I'm a Deputy Exec Member for Adult Social Care, Active Lifestyles and Public Health.
Good afternoon, Victoria Eaton, Director of Public Health.
Good afternoon, I'm Shona McFarlane. I'm the Deputy Director for Adults and Health and I'm representing the Interim Director, Caroline Barrier, today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Dr. Morsata. I'm a GP and I'm a Clinical Director of Chapeltown PCN, Primary Care Network.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is George Winder. I'm a GP by trade, but I'm also the chair of the Leeds GP Confederation.
Good afternoon, I'm Andrea Mann. I'm a Clinical Director for Crossgates Primary Care Network and a Managing Partner in Primary Care. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gaynor Connor. I'm Director of Primary Care and Same Day Response for the ICB in Leeds.
Councillor Winkage, you're representing Morley South.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Conrad Hartbrook. I've been a member of this committee coming up to 3 years, and I'm a council representing Rothwell Ward.
Councillor Samforth for the Harewood Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Caroline Anderson. I represent Adlan Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon. I'm Angela Brogden, Principal Scrutiny Advisor.
Thank you very much, everyone, and welcome. I'd just like to say that Councillor James Goodson, he's the chair of the licensing committee, and I think that meeting's running over, so he's going to join us once that meeting finishes. And also Councillor Salma Arif, it's her wedding week, so I'd like to wish her all the best for Friday in particular. Okay, so let's move on to the first items, and I'm going to pass over to Angela to run through the first items. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So under item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item 2, there are no items for exclusion. In relation to item 3, there are no late items. And under item 4, please may I ask if board members have any declarations of interest? And I shall take silence as none. Thank you. And under item 5, we've had no apologies made by board members, and as the chair explained, Councillor Gibson's indicated that he may be a bit late, and also apologies from Councillor Arif and also from Caroline Barrier as the Interim Director of Adults and Health. Thank you.
Super, thank you. So we're going to move on to the minutes next. So first, any points of action in the minutes that anyone wants to raise? I can't see anyone indicating, so I'm going to take those as a true record. I can see nods. Good. Okay, matters arise, and I'll start with you, Angela. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There's a number from the last meeting. Minute number 21, the Chair's been advised by the Director of Public Health that a briefing paper from the Drug and Alcohol team regarding the issue of cannabis use, particularly amongst young people, will be made available in October. Sticking with minute 21, the Children Family Scrutiny Board will be holding its working group meeting on the issue of vaping amongst children and young people on the 27th of September at 2:30, and Councillor Scopes and Councillor Anderson have volunteered to attend this meeting to represent this particular scrutiny board. Minute 22, as requested, members have now received information on the evaluation framework that was linked to the community mental health grant allocations, while members also requested further information surrounding neurodiversity assessments for children. It is now proposed that this matter be considered as part of a working group approach as opposed to just receiving a briefing paper. So arrangements for this will be confirmed shortly. And finally, in relation to minute 23, linked to the Healthy Leeds plan, members have been sent details of the existing outcome frameworks that's associated with each of the population boards. We've been advised that these are currently under review, so we're expecting update versions to be available by November. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. And just going back to the vaping one, because we're looking particularly at younger people using them, it feels like it probably is a Children and Family Scrutiny Board item to lead on, but they're letting us be part of the discussion. So I think that's really important. If there are any other matters anyone wants to raise? Yes, Councillor Ritchie.
Yeah, sorry to take up a bit of time, but I just want to record my thanks around the drug issue, because I know that a shout out has been put out through the Local Care Partnership Digest. So for sort of gathering intelligence. So I do appreciate that. So thank you, Victoria, I think particularly for instigating that.
Good. Great. Okay, anything else? Okay, so now we're going to move on to our first substantive item, which is access to GP practice, which obviously affects everyone in the city. I'm going to hand over to Councillor Venner to start. Just as always, you can always assume that we've read the papers, but obviously key points, please draw them out. Thanks, Councillor Venner.
Yeah, so I'll introduce the report and then am I handing over to you, Gaynor? Yeah. So I'm introducing this in the Health Partnerships part of my role, where I chair the Health and Wellbeing Board. So this report is in the context of access to GPs being the top health issue that is raised by the public. So with things like the Big Leeds chat or the work that Healthwatch undertake, this is the issue that's raised the most. So it's frequently discussed at the Health and Wellbeing Board. And we know both that people are struggling sometimes to access GPs and that GPs are working incredibly hard. So both those things are true. So GPs are now, as the report states, offering more appointments and more face-to-face appointments than they were pre-pandemic, but demand has soared. So you have those two things both coexisting, that people are struggling to access and GPs are working harder than they ever have. And we've discussed at this board and at the Health and Wellbeing Board the amount of abuse that GPs and their staff receive sometimes by members of the public who are frustrated. In fact, we had a workshop of the Health and Wellbeing Board just to discuss the issues of staff wellbeing, not only for GPs, but across the health system, because we know that staff working in health and social care in all the organisations in the city are experiencing an increase in abuse, and we wanted to look at their wellbeing. So in the Health and Wellbeing Board, we've also discussed campaigns to promote people's understanding of the range of services that are provided at a GP's practice, that people don't always need to see a doctor. You know, there's pharmacists and there's social prescribers who personally I'm a big fan of. So social prescribers who work across the city are there to support GP practices where people are presenting, but the underlying causes are around the wider determinants of health. So, for example, if someone's underlying issue is housing or loneliness, a social prescriber can support by directing them to services that we're able to be able to support them. And this is reflected in the paper where it talks about the modern general practice of multidisciplinary working. So we're really keen to promote that there's a huge range of expertise and support available through primary care. It's not only seeing a doctor. The report also refers to the Accessible Information Standard, which is about people's communication needs. And again, we picked that up as a really important issue. And we did a workshop on that also in the last year in the Health and Wellbeing Board, where we heard from a deaf person, we heard from someone with learning disabilities about their challenges in being communicated with by the health system. And Jim Barwick from the GP Confederation took away actions to look at how we can improve that, and we'll get a report back in the next couple of months on that. So overall, as you'll have seen in the report, the picture in Leeds is more positive than it is across the country, but we also do need to continue to support primary care in their continued aspiration for improved access. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Councillor Venner. I'm conscious in presenting this report to the Scrutiny Committee that there's a vast amount of information in there, and I know that councillors will want to ask specific questions. So just by way of introduction, I'd just like to just bring out a couple of points, some of which emphasise, or both of which emphasise or echo things that Councillor Venner has said by way of her introduction. And then what I'd like to do is invite my general practice colleagues to share their experiences of sort of, you know, a day in the real life of general practice, if you like, and they want to draw out further items for discussion, if that's okay with committee members. So first thing I'd like to say, and again say, I know this has already been picked up by Councillor Venner, is just that the total quantum of appointments that we now offer across general practice is significant and is above pre-pandemic levels. Within the paper, I did include a comparison, I think, which just helps to show the context. So for comparison, an average day around 900 people are seen in our city's emergency departments, and you can contrast that with 19,000 appointments being delivered in general practice every day. The total number of appointments now, as I said, exceeds pre-pandemic levels, with 40% of those being delivered on the same day and 74% of those being face-to-face, which is something we know that patients really highly value. Nationally, there's been a requirement to continue to recruit to the national number of 26,000 additional roles by the end of March, and we continue to commit to that in Leeds. As Councillor Venner says, our workforce has grown in general practice in recent years due to the number of the additional roles that are funded through that national scheme, the Additional Roles Reimbursement Scheme, or the ARS scheme for short. So these roles are employed to work with groups of practices in their primary care networks. And by the end of this financial year, which is the end of the 5-year scheme, we will have employed an additional 400 whole-time equivalents within general practice across the city. So the roles include pharmacists, care coordinators, physios, social prescribers and mental health workers, as well as others. And people can be care navigated to see one of these professionals when it's preferable to be them being seen by a doctor. So, for example, somebody with back pain being able to see a physio directly rather than going through a GP, or seeing a pharmacist where there might be a medication issue. And again, as Councillor Venner referred to, this is part of that vision for modern general practice, which I think is still not well understood nationally and locally by some members of the public. So I think we've still got work to do there together. So general practice continues to be a really busy and dynamic part of our health and care system. And that's probably as much as I was going to say by way of introduction, keeping it brief, knowing that you'll have all read the report and you'll have questions. But I'd just like to bring in at this point Dr. George Winder, who, as he said, is both a GP and chair of the Leeds GP Confed, just to share some of his reflections and to further our discussion this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Gaynor, and thanks, Councillor Venner, for the summary and introduction. And I hope it's a lovely opportunity for us all to give you a flavour of what is happening in general practice at the moment. And it's a really welcome opportunity, so thank you. The points that we would like to draw out from the report are somewhat varied, but I hope you'll give us an opportunity and some latitude around how we reach them. The issue that I'd like to bring out is that what we don't understand is what is good access, and that access is different for different people. And what we often talk about is access by numbers. We know, for example, that lots of people value continuity more than access, but currently we describe access by the number of appointments that we offer, not by the continuity that we offer. We also know that there is no direct correlation between the number of appointments that you offer as a GP surgery to the satisfaction that patients feel in the service that you provide. A recent study showed that there is as much correlation between the name of the practice and its rate of satisfaction as the amount of appointments it offers and its satisfaction. So that's to say, the more appointments we offer does not increase satisfaction or patient satisfaction in a global sum. But what we know is that continuity across staff groups within primary care increases satisfaction and decreases healthcare utilisation. I think it's really important to remember that whilst it is important that we provide adequate levels of access, and we absolutely recognise that people struggle with access to their GP, we also need to think about how we balance those two things of continuity and access. I think it's also important to know that the staff that work within primary care are also citizens of Leeds. I am foremost not a GP, I'm foremost a dad, a brother, a son to people who are growing up and getting older in this city. My mum can't get appointments, she's got dementia, she can't get appointments. My sister with her kids can't get appointments. It is incredibly difficult for everyone. And I think we really heartfelt feel that. And what we want to do is try and find a way of bridging that gap and doing something, but that might not mean offering more. And as Gain has alluded to, that we need to really have those honest conversations with citizens about modern general practice, what that looks like, so that we can ensure that we promote continuity, so that we promote good access, but we get that balance right. And so I think there is, whilst currently the situation for patients and for staff in primary care in Leeds is fairly awful, and I've used that word deliberately, it's fairly awful. That's how our staff would describe it. And that's how some of my family members would describe it. I think there is hope. I think Gain has alluded to that, and I'm going to hand over to Andrea to talk a little bit about the roles and the R's roles. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the challenges around estates and other access. So I'm going to hand over to Andrea.
Thank you, George. Thank you for inviting us today. I think it's a really useful opportunity to kind of discuss the different roles that we've got that we are all hoping are going to make a difference in terms of access in general practice. I just wanted to kind of draw the attention to section 4 on the report in terms of the different roles and give you a little bit of context as to how far we've come and where we are at the moment. So over the past 4 years, when the R's roles started to get introduced into primary care networks, we had 0 of these roles, and we've built them up, as Gain has mentioned, to over 400 at the moment, whole-time equivalents. And these are a range of health professionals from unregistered and registered roles. And some of these, many of these are very new to primary care. So we're very familiar, and patients are, with GPs, practice nurses, advanced practitioners, and over the past few years, pharmacists. But many of the other roles are usually working in secondary care or community settings. So it's not, a patient's first choice to ring up and ask to be booked in with some of these roles. So there's a huge amount of patient education around what different roles are in primary care and what types of services and clinics that they can book into. But we've also got to remember that these new roles have also come from different areas, and they need to have a lot of support and training to embed them into primary care. It's a very different way of working from where they're used to, and some of them are fairly newly qualified in the role, or they've moved from other areas which they need. They've had a team support of, say, other occupational therapists, other physios, and they may be the only one within a primary care setting. So actually taking them out of that usual environment does have a big impact on them as they start in a new role. And we've also found from feedback from primary care colleagues that, we're not really sure also what to do with some of the roles. There's not a mandate as to what they've to offer specifically. And it is around your own population needs and sort of different diversities and kind of what types of appointments and services that a primary care network needs to offer. So you'll notice that there is a variation on the numbers of whole-time equivalents across different primary care networks. And we've all got different budgets in terms of what ARS roles we can recruit, but it will also have an impact in terms of the area that they can recruit into. So some more deprived areas will really struggle with any workforce recruitment, but specifically the new roles. And what we noticed at the start, sort of a couple of years ago, was, you know, other health professionals didn't really know what primary care networks were, to be looking for these jobs and actually be careful about taking on a position in primary care. But we've seen this past year or two, that's definitely increased as the teams have increased. It is starting to attract more of these new roles. But on the side of that, when they do start, you know, we do have to do quite a period of training, supervision, and that takes time away from the GPs. So, for example, a pharmacist may come in and they need 18 months to 2 years training in the particular role that they're in primary care, and they need clinical supervision from a GP or another prescriber. So that takes appointments away from GPs to be able to do this supervision, and that's definitely been felt across primary care. So at the same time we're trying to increase numbers of GP appointments and access, we're actually reducing some of that access through supporting some of these roles, and we won't really see the benefit of that until they've gone through that period of training and supervision. So, I mean, it is really encouraging the different roles, and I think as teams have built up, you know, we've also got the challenges of estates. So there's not the funding within primary care to grow and develop our estates strategy. So we're actually faced with some primary care networks actually stuck in terms of recruiting more posts because they have nowhere to put them. So to be able to offer appointments to patients, they need to have a clinical room so that they can see patients face to face, because the majority of patients still want face to face contact. But we have very limited space within primary care. So, you know, we are looking at new ways of working and how we can offer that, but that is a real challenge. And I think a lot of primary care networks have stopped recruiting to a point that they've just got no access for them. So I think just finally on my point before I hand you over to my colleague for sort of another area is just, you know, within the teams, part of the challenge we've got is really communicating to patients what the new roles are, why we've got them in practice, what types of services and appointments they can offer, and then also training our current staff to signpost into those roles appropriately. And we're constant, because of the amount of new roles that we're recruiting and the training needs, that is an ongoing updated training for them. So real challenges around getting the new roles into practice, keeping them and retaining them, but also sort of making sure they're embedded within the teams in primary care. So I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Sarah, just to follow up on that. But thank you. Happy to take some more questions later.
Thank you. Sarah, can you introduce yourself? Because I don't think you was here at the start. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you. I'm Dr. Sarah McSorley. I'm Vice Chair of Leeds LMC. I'm also a locum GP in the city, currently having been a salary GP in Chapeltown previously for about 4 years to that. I just wanted to thank Andrew for those points, and also I was going to make the point about the estates, so I reiterate that, but also wanted just to also...
Sorry, could you just speak up a little bit, Sarah?
Yeah.
We're just struggling to hear. Thank you.
Sorry, okay. Just make the point as well that about the funding limitations, just to reiterate that point really. So having been only 2% uplift over the last 5 years, which is obviously not in line with inflation, that's had an effect on practices being able to retain and recruit staff. And in addition to that, just the additional work from left shift from secondary care, having an impact on waiting times in primary care. And also a lot of the appointments are still remote outpatient appointments, which isn't always to satisfaction of patients. So that can end up having an effect on wanting to see GPs additionally, which wouldn't always be necessary. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it might be helpful if you explain what you mean by left shift.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, that's a bit of technical term in our world. So basically, the workload from secondary care, which was really being moved out to primary care, it's been happening for quite a long time, and it isn't always appropriate, we feel, as from GPs, and it does have a massive impact really on the workload to all the staff in general practice, including the admin team. So that, I think that has a huge impact on access. It really was in the plan, but also has happened a lot since the pandemic. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Mosata, do you want to add anything before we move into questions?
I think I'll try and answer some questions.
Super, thank you. So I'm going to open up to questions from members. If anyone wants to ask a question, please indicate in the usual way. Otherwise, I'll start with my questions and we'll see how we get on. Okay, so thank you very much for that. I found this report really, really interesting. Just a couple to start with. So the first one is around, I thought it's really impressive statistic. 80% are booked within 14 days. I had a question around the sort of this other 20%, sort of the tail of that, and whether that was like how far it goes out. And then sort of linked to that, which is still appointments, is I really appreciated the map that you put in on page 35 of the pack. I thought that was really helpful to see where the practices are. I was wondering in terms of the pinch points. So just because it's too close to each other, I guess the population can be more dense in different areas. So I was wondering if there's any really particular pinch points in terms of where waiting time is longer than other places. So 2 questions about appointment times. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the report containing the data around appointments booked within 14 days, the reason for including that is it's one of the national measures that we are monitored against. I did then do a subsequent piece of work to look at that remaining 20% councillor scope. So we can track that per practice and per PCN. If I look at the primary care network, where there's the largest disparity in terms of appointments booked within 14 days or appointments booked beyond 14 days, the data tells me that most of the appointments that are booked beyond the 14-day cut-off point are for those types of procedures that are booked or pre-planned, or booked in advance for a reason, not because there isn't any availability within that 14-day period. Our data very clearly shows us that. Like I said, that longer term tail is where, like I say, appointments need to be and can be and should be booked further in advance for the purposes of, say, monitoring a chronic condition. We expect all practices to respond to patients based on clinical need. So offering both that, if somebody needs to be seen clinically on the day, being able to do that, and then, like I say, then that other national measure of appointments being booked within that next 2-week period. So that data is available, and I can share it as a subsequent piece of data should you want it.
Yes, please. And then the question around pinch points.
I don't have a specific data set in terms of pinch points, other than, like I say, the data that we use, which shows both the quantum of appointments and the time within which they're booked, and the type of appointments, which does show a spread across the city. Each practice uses their own sort of operational model, if you like, so we might not necessarily be comparing apples with apples in terms of that direct value of this percentage of patients are booked within this percentage of time from one practice to another. But as I say, you know, we use our data alongside the insight that we get from patients, and also the information that we get in terms of the National GP Survey. So if we feel there's an area where there's an issue, then obviously we would be looking at any unwarranted variation in those areas. But I haven't got anything here now that says we've got a particular pinch point in X practice or Y PCN.
Okay, so I guess you're going back to your point. I think it's Andrew's point about the estates. I guess, is that the data you'd need before you decided where you would build increased capacity?
Capacity works slightly differently in terms of a general practice contract. So a contract is paid per capita per head of population, and the payment follows the registration of a patient. So we don't have, so I think unlike schools, for example, so you can in a council sense, can't you, plan for a new school knowing that there's going to be new housing and therefore there'll be numbers of children wanting that school. We can't do the same in anticipation because of the way that the GP contract and the national funding flows. Funding follows once patients have been registered. So again, we've got that balance of understanding where we think there might be projected population growths, or where we think there might be practices that have outgrown their building size. Because again, there are calculations between the square meterage that a practice can claim reimbursement of the rent for versus their registered population. So there's some quite complex things within that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think George wants to come in.
Is that okay, Chair? Just a number of the people in this room are also involved in the work around the East Leeds extension and the development that will the housing development and the pressure that will put on not just GP services, but the wider health economy. That said, it's an absolutely great opportunity. And I think I should probably share a few people's frustrations that we've yet managed to grasp that nettle. It's both a challenge, but a real opportunity. As Gaynor said, part of the challenge from primary care's perspective is that the money will only flow once patients are registered. And there is a huge challenge around who's going to, again, bridge that gap of risk. Currently, there is no obvious large partner within the city who is keen to do that, understandably. There is a challenge about the rate of housing growth, which we're at the whim, it would appear to be, of a number of developers and other people. And in terms of pinch points, while that may not currently exist, it's certainly one that we would project to the future, I suspect. And I think as a collective, there is something that we should be doing to ensure that that doesn't happen, because currently at the moment it's waiting to happen, and we're at not an impasse, but certainly a significant challenging time where we can't pass that. So one of our asks would be, how as a city can we really do something innovative? How can we share that risk? How can we take those steps forward? Because otherwise that area, we will waste the opportunity and we will create further pinch points.
I just wanted to add that there is quite a lot of good work going on in terms of sharing estates, and I should thank partners in the city, especially people like the library services who have opened their doors and created hubs where we can actually have some of our staff working in their spaces. So there's lots of creative ways that we are doing some joint working, sharing spaces, third sector, if I could call that, a voluntary sector. So I think we should thank those people who have partnered with general practice primary care to give us that resilience. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to bring in Dr. John Beale.
Thank you, Chair. There were two things I wanted to pick up, but can I just make a comment on one other point, which Sarah has already mentioned in paragraph 4.3. Within the National GP contract, there has been a 2% staff pay uplift to practice funding in each of the last 5 years. I couldn't believe that when I read it. In fact, I've marked it down with 3 exclamation marks. Because I'm sure that there is no one in the government, there is no one in NHS England who got a 2% pay rise for each of the last 5 years. And I think that is just absolutely appalling. And just wanted to say, I'm speaking here personally, not on behalf of Health Watch Leeds, but I was really amazed at that comment in there. The two things I wanted to pick up, Chair, were first of all in 2.9, to enable patients in over 90% of practice to see their records, and that clearly includes being able to book appointments. Healthwatch Leeds has recently been undertaking an investigation about access to GP services, and it's not published yet. It's in a draft form at the moment, but I know that one of the things which people have said, or at least some of the respondents have said, was difficulty in using the electronic appointment system. And it's not always clear actually what you do. I got probably a year or so ago now, a text from my practice saying that from such and such a date, they would be using patches. Didn't describe what patches were, didn't describe how I got hold of patches, didn't describe what it did, didn't describe how to use it. We really do need to make sure that we let people know how to use these electronic digital systems, and particularly for older people, maybe for people with a whole range of different disabilities. We need to accept that some of them are never ever going to be able to use it anyhow, but some of them can use it if they have the training and the explanation about how to use it. So I do think we need to be much wiser about how we actually communicate with people and provide training, whether that could be done within practices or local libraries or community centres or whatever. But there are people who will struggle to use it unless someone shows them how to do it. And the other thing I was going to raise, and I do like bar charts, and I do like league tables, especially I have to say when Arsenal are at the top. But I'm also slightly disappointed when I see that Bradford is doing better than Leeds. So on page 28, we've got the average number of appointments per 1,000 population. And Bradford does much better than Leeds. In fact, Leeds is bottom of the league on this. And even when you look at it by the IMD deciles, for all except for one decile, Bradford is way out. Now, is that because they have more GPs per 1,000, or the GPs have more appointments per GP compared with Leeds? Perhaps we can pursue and dig a bit deeper about why Bradford patients seem to be getting more access to GP appointments than we do in Leeds.
Thank you, Dr. Beale. I think your first set of comments around the use of digital tools, so the use of patches as an online system, or the use of the NHS app. I think you made some really good points, and I think there is more that we could do and should be doing and will be doing in relation to comms with communications with patients. But we've been, as part of the work that we've been doing to improve that, we've been doing work with the 100% Digital Leeds team, who have been working with practices in the local care partnership area. So having stalls set up at various places locally, and having open days in particular GP practices where patients are able to come and learn and see and how to use those devices and how to load the app on the phone. So we're really pleased with the support of the 100% Digital Leeds team, and we want to continue to do that work, recognising that there is still more to do. I think in terms of the information on page 28, there is a comment just at 3.7 saying that as part of our work across West Yorkshire to understand variation, we are wanting to look at what data is being submitted and how appointments are being categorised. And I do think there is an element of some of our data is missing. So I think that hopefully the next time that this data is updated and presented, we may have a different position in terms of Leeds versus Bradford. I don't believe that they've got more access in terms of quantum to the level that's reflected here. I think some of our appointment data is missing, particularly those appointments that are provided on the evening and a weekend. So we need to get much better at the way that we collect and report our data as part of the West Yorkshire set of data.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Farley next.
Thank you, Chair. So I've just got a few questions about workforce and then a little bit about integration. So currently, you know, as you know, with the launch of the NHS long-term workforce plan a few months ago, a lot of the conversations now moved to kind of how we how's the system actively looking to kind of recruit people from right across communities. What does that citywide workforce plan look like specifically, if there is such a thing, for primary care? And it is primary care in the city, you know, actively working together, I assume through the GP Confederation, to recruit and then look to the future, kind of where are our future general practice clinicians coming from? I'll leave that there, and I've got some more workforce questions.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just pick up the beginning of that. I think primary care plays a really prominent role in the Leeds One Workforce group. We've been doing some work with the Leeds Health and Care Academy around hyperlocal recruitment, which builds on some work that they did very successfully with LCH and the recruitment for Red Kite View. So there was, when that new children's and adolescent mental health unit opened in Armley, they did some very targeted approaches with that local community, and there was a lot of learning from that. So we are now rolling out that approach in Bermontoft's, Hare Hills and Richmond Hill PCN, where we're offering the chance for the local community to come forward with an interest in roles in general practice, and they'll do some pre-employment work that gives them a basic level qualification, and then we're able to match them with vacancies and practices in the city, and say we'll take the learning from that work in that PCN and then move that across in terms of the other primary care networks as a different initiative to recruit locally. I went with some colleagues and heard at the Forum for Race Equality in Health and Social Care very loudly that people want to see a workforce that represents the local community. So we're really pleased to be taking that forward with the Leeds Health and Care Academy. We've also done work with LCH, so Leeds Community Healthcare Trust, where they've offered PCNs the opportunity to employ and then deploy staff. So we've tried to do that at scale across primary care networks with a number of those additional roles, so that people are not working in isolation, but also have some of the advantages of working for an NHS trust whilst being deployed to work in general practice. So there's a number of workforce initiatives that we are trying to take forward, as well as creating networks of people, as Andrea was saying before. Some of these roles are new to general practice, so we're creating some of those networks within primary care, so that's opportunities for training, learning and supervision. I'll pause there.
Just so you can come back in, Councillor Fuller, just to highlight that we're talking about workforce challenges and impacting on health care services next meeting in October as well. But this is specific about GP practices. It's fine. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you. Just with regards to the R's roles, are they coming from outside of general practice? That they sit with the trusts and then are deployed into the community? Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor Farley. I think we're all fishing from the same pond is a big challenge. We've got a lot of experience out there within different organisations, and some of them are keen to work in primary care networks, to provide extra appointments, but yet you then destabilise in some other areas. I think what Gaynor is saying in terms of we've done tried to look at some posts where we can do some joint sharing across different organisations to retain them within each organisation and not destabilise areas. But there are some new ones, and they're the ones that need that support and training. But we've also got other workforce training schemes across West Yorkshire. So one example of vocational training scheme for new to practice nurses. But I think there was only about 3 in Leeds positions, so there wasn't that many, and there was probably about 150 that applied. So there's a lot of interest out there to come and work in primary care, but then there's not the opportunities necessarily to take them all. So combination of new ones that need a lot of training and support, and then there's the other ones that are in the system and you're risking destabilising other areas.
Yes, Sarah, do you want to come in?
Yeah, part of a workforce plan is not just recruitment, it's retention. If I was going to describe the main problem in primary care at the moment, it's retention. It's pretty awful working in any role in primary care at the moment, from front reception to GPs to practice managers. There is a retention crisis in primary care. If you look at the data around number of trainees coming in through GP vocational training schemes and the amount of those that choose to work full time, there's a significant variation between that. I used to, when I started doing this job, work 10 sessions. That was 10 half days. Quite frankly, that is impossible these days, for a number of reasons, including the complexity, the time commitment, everything around it. But we have a real challenge. General practice has become a role in which nobody wants to pursue a 5-day week, and that lends a challenge to continuity. How do you maintain continuity when most people working in primary care now do not want to work? I'm not saying full-time hours, because still do, but certainly spread across every day, and most people are choosing portfolio careers now. So retention becomes the biggest problem. We need to do something about retention, and that is again a challenge that I think we could do something around, working with the public, working with lots of organisations about understanding what modern general practice looks like, and that if we had that better continuity, we would overall likely improve the service and improve satisfaction.
Sarah, do you want to come in?
I just want to add to the points that George has made. We're lucky to have a good network of GP registrars in Leeds that often do stay and work in the city as salary GPs or partners or locums. But ONC did a survey relatively recently and of the GP registrars, and a lot of them were planning to not stay on even in the country, never mind Leeds, and to move abroad. So that's obviously very concerning for the future of GPs in our city. We have members of LMC committee members who are GP registrars, and we try and keep them in touch with as much as possible and involve them. I just wanted to add to George's point further about the work-life balance for GPs. I think it's not often recognised by the public how much work staff do in their own time, weekends, evenings. If it's not doing blood results and things or letters, it's sort of emails and WhatsApp messages constantly. So that obviously they can lead to burnout, which is a significant cause of the loss of lots of GPs in the city. And then finally, just about the estates as well. Like Andrea said, people are being stolen by other trusts, not just locally, but even further towards the northeast, because they've got better estates. They're offering people to have their cars charged for free, their electronic cars and things like that. So we're not anywhere near that in Leeds. So that's, people are obviously also concerned about their carbon footprint as well in this. So just all those points to be taken forward, please.
Just on the back of that, I love my job. It's the best job in the world. I just want to reinforce that. I asked colleagues, I qualified as a GP in 2016. I've been a doctor for much longer than that. But when I posted on our WhatsApp group to the colleagues that I sort of qualified with as GPs, what would make you take up a salaried or a partnership role in a GP surgery, they gave me 3 things, and those 3 things were a good coffee shop, a Waitrose nearby, and a car park.
Thanks for that. Luke, Councillor Farley, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. Well, it's obviously positive news to hear that we're at least retaining 1 GP in the city. I suppose just on the back of that, I should have asked this with 2 practicing GPs in the room, but can I obviously, in primary care, we are asking people to work to the top of their register, like day in, day out. And I suppose the question is, and it's difficult with general practice because it is the triage service for a lot of people, and the contact that they have is 10 minutes with you guys in clinic. But I suppose the question is, are we always directing people to the right place, and is there more that can be done to make the public aware of alternative provision, pharmacy first services? Perhaps it's the case that we've got almost like social care or alternative provision. Perhaps you could talk a little bit more about that. Thank you.
I think I'll come in on that. So part of I've got dual hat, so I'm managing partner of a practice. So one of my challenges is around the communication and upskilling our frontline staff in terms of that signposting. So first of all, to be able to do that effectively, we need to have enough on the front line taking the calls to be able to signpost into these services. That's a challenge in itself. Our reception team who are navigating patients, the ones that have been in primary care for a long time, are still with us generally unless they've retired. But the new ones coming in, it's extremely difficult to recruit receptionists because of the nature of the role and the public perception of what a receptionist is. They take a huge amount of abuse, and a lot of the new ones are quite keen to come into the role, but they leave quite quickly not because they've got the support. It's just not what they were expecting, and they don't have appointments in their pocket to be able to give out. And a lot of patients do think that they're holding appointments back. So they are constantly getting that abuse around appointments. And when they're starting to signpost patients, because they don't have enough GP appointments on that day to offer them, there's, as you can see from the list of the different roles, the amount of different types of roles, experience and services to be able to explain that appropriately to different patients for the triage is really quite difficult. In Leeds, with our PCN, we've got 3 platforms for appointments. So one is our practice clinical system, and patients can book online for that. We've got the GP Confederation platform. So for the extended hours, the weekends, evenings, they can't book online for those ones. And then we have a different system for the PCNR's role staff. And again, they can't book online for that. So our reception front line, when they're signposting, is first establishing what the patient's needs are in that triage, then where they can see them, booking into a different system every time, and also trying to get through the call very, very quickly, because the biggest challenge patients' feedback has been is getting through to their GP surgery, and it's constantly either engaged or they're just queuing a long time. And part of that is the length of time to signpost patients is creating a huge amount of backlog on the phones. So plus you need the bodies answering the phones. And that's the difficulty that we've got.
Dr. Murray.
I would say that there is a lot more that we can do. We need to empower the public. I think we have lost the public health message about self-care. So signposting is absolutely important. but we really need to invest in empowering people. People can take care of themselves most of the time, and we have absolutely lost that. But it is a confusing system that we've got in terms of health and social care. So a survey said 48% of working age people found it difficult to navigate the system. Although having said that, you will see the ARS roles and social prescribers and health and wellbeing coaches are playing a vital role in signposting people to the right place.
Sarah?
Can I just, I agree with Andrea's point, but I also want to say it's the same goes for recruitment and retention of the GP staff and the nursing staff, not just the admin teams. Again, for the same reasons, there's a lot of GP particular bashing that goes on, particularly in the media. I think the majority of people are actually really happy with their GPs, to be honest, if you actually spoke to them in the street, especially if they've known them for a long time. But I think the media is disproportionately negative, and that has a huge impact. And I think it just takes a couple of people to whip up something locally, and that can have a real effect on people's the staff's mental health, and perhaps the final straw sometimes. So yeah, I think there's a lot of positive things that people say about their GPs and their practice staff, and I think that needs to be celebrated and published and supported by the city really as a whole. And I think that's the way, it's a great city. I've chosen to work here, having trained down south. I worked in Bradford, I've worked in Harrogate, but Leeds is where I want to be a GP for various reasons. So I think we need to sort of promote that really to everybody, and so getting the media message out, really a more positive one, because we do get those reports. It just needs to be sold to the public really.
Councillor Venner?
Thank you. On the back of that and the comments about GP receptionists, I just wanted to say a little bit about why we did the workshop that I referred to earlier around supporting staff and staff retention. It came out of, I'm a governor at Leeds and York Partnership Foundation Trust, and we have obviously an annual staff survey, and I was quite shocked by the percentage of staff who said that they'd faced abuse from patients or their families or the public in the last year. I was shocked, but I wasn't surprised, because I'm also in a frontline role, and I think it's well known how much abuse politicians get in public life. And we've talked here about the amount of abuse GPs take, and specifically their receptionists. And I think that's really striking, that the people that sometimes face the worst abuse are the lower status, less financially recompensed staff. And I felt we really needed to look at this, because, and I am saying this partly from my own experience of having a public role as well. It just feels sometimes like there's a culture where it's acceptable. And I don't think it's only people in health and social care. I think people working in call centres, people working in shops, anyone really in a public facing role is facing an increase in abuse. I think some of that's because the public are at the end of their tether. We've had a really challenging few years with the pandemic, cost of living crisis. I think people are really struggling, and that's coming out in the way people behave towards people in public facing roles. But obviously the part of the system where we've got some influence is the health and care sector, and one of the benefits of the Health and Wellbeing Board is you've got the most senior people in the system, who can affect change. So we did a workshop looking at issues around staff support and welfare, and how we can create a culture of zero tolerance of abuse. We also talked about some of the nuances of that, because, for example, in a psychiatric ward, you may get abuse from people because they're not capacitous, or because they're against their will. So we talked about what happens in environments where you're going to face some challenges, how you support each other with that. We also heard from the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian at LCH, and we are the only authority in the country to also have a Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. And one of the actions we took forward is that we're going to, in 6 months, have another workshop and look at themes coming out from the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian's work and what's been brought to them as things people are struggling with. But I do feel like we all have some responsibility to you know, to support staff working in health and care, and also I know there has been a West Yorkshire campaign about the unacceptability of abuse, but I do feel like we need to do more work in that area really, because it is one of the reasons that we're not retaining staff, is that it's hard working in a frontline job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Venner. I'm going to move on to Councillor Ritchie now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First thing I want to say thank you actually for working and being committed to the NHS throughout, whatever the roles that you're in and your colleagues. I think I certainly value it. I'm sure everybody in this room does as well. So I'll start with a thank you. And I think Dr. Winder made the point that as a double stakeholder, that his family and your families use the NHS. Well, you're triple stakeholders because you also pay for it through your taxes, I trust. So thank you again. Also, thank you for the context around the hours, how that starts to work in, and the loss of appointments while the training. That's really helpful to know. I just wanted to talk a couple of things around the booking system, really. Page 33, 5.6 talks about the race to get through and so on and so forth. And there's been some discussion around triaging and signposting. I just wondered, obviously, I don't know what systems every GP service has got, but if there was a way to self-refer to the physiotherapy, so when you ring up, instead of it all going to that receptionist and putting them under pressure, that actually you can think about it. I've sprained my ankle. I want to ring the number for the physiotherapist. I'm not saying the council's telephone centre's perfect, but you get a range of options and, you know, dial X for this. So I'm guessing that goes to different staff. So I don't know if that's something you can do. And then also expanding the online bookings for those extra services as well. So that's the first point. The second one is around planning issues. Now, I wonder, it's a while since I've been on planning committees, but every time there's a new development, members on the panel would ask about health provision. So your insight as to the issues that it has to come after is really interesting. I wonder if we need to, you know, collective sit in the room with our chief planners around a strategy towards this, because we've got the site allocation plan. We know where the housing growth is going to be. So some kind of a mechanism of planning ahead. I realise you mentioned the funding's an issue. So that's one element of it. But the other element is increasing capacity quickly. Again, do we need to sit down with the planners and look at, we've got scope to do supplementary planning documents so that we can fast track perhaps temporary accommodation. I know that's been an issue for GP surgeries in my patch when they've wanted to get maybe porta cabins or something in, but the time it takes to get through planning. So again, working together with our planning department, see if we can do anything around that. So that's it from me. Thank you.
I think I'll just pick up the first question, if that's okay. Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. In terms of the self-referral, so there are a number of services patients can already refer into self-refer. They are limited at the moment. And I think a lot of it is because patients don't know where the services are. So I think we'd mentioned about social prescribers and kind of their support with that navigation. The phone system, so some of the practices do already have the cloud-based phone systems, and you can have different options for press 1, press 2 for this, etc. We've got that at our practice. It's the same team that are answering the phones. It's just that we can report on the different numbers in terms of whether it's gone to prescriptions. But obviously we can expand on some of that service in terms of putting the options on the phone line for when patients are ringing, so that we can also be thinking about kind of, actually, I can maybe ask for a physio an appointment. So some practices are probably already doing that really well. A lot of patients don't realise which role they can book into for different conditions. So again, that self-referral can be a bit of a challenge because ordinarily they want to see the GP. So again, it's that communication across you know, not just the practice, that it needs to be a large scale comms around the different roles and empowering patients to be able to ask for these different roles and kind of have an appointment with a particular practitioner. But again, we've not got that consistency across every single practice. We all have different roles in the practices in a PCN. So it's not consistent message that you could say ask to book in with a physio, because one area might not have them for different reasons. I'll pass you on to Gaynor for the other 2 points. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. So we're trying to get better, and I think we have got better in terms of working with colleagues in the council from a planning perspective. So we look to things like, you know, how the community infrastructure levy can work in terms of new developments and whether there can be provision for health premises within that. We also, I think, had the opportunity to do quite a lot around the East Leeds extension. So again, we have met with planners in relation to that. And we, primary care is a member of the city's strategic estates group. So again, I think some of those positive things that Mo mentioned, you know, like the work in terms of the libraries, some of those opportunities have come out through the connections at the strategic estates group, and how we can have a sense of one public estate in the city, and, you know, how do we maximise a state that is there for the benefit of our populations. It's not, like I was saying before, it's quite complex. It's not an easy one to crack, but I think we are trying to, and have been doing, like I say, to work much more closely with planning colleagues in the council, understanding and anticipating where we're going to have growth or pinch points going forward.
I think it's great to give patients the autonomy to be able to book in with who they think may be the best person to solve their problem. And I think I would advocate that, although the other side to that would be we don't want to miss something. So I guess there's a risk that we need to consider in terms of uncertainty. But we would hope that if there was a back pain, for example, that was sinister and they'd seen the physio, that would then quickly make its way to me, and often does. The second thing in terms of estates, it's great having more rooms where doctors and physios and pharmacists can sit in them, but I think we need to think about this differently. If we want to be the healthiest city in the UK, then we need to think about GP practice buildings being different. So we're using our buildings differently. Health and wellbeing teams are doing healthy living, exercise, patient education sessions. So we need spaces so that people can do that in and also feel comfortable in. So light and airy plants. You know, we need to think about all these things. When you look at hospitals and they're built, you look outside and you're looking onto a car park. That is not going to heal people. Thanks.
And just a final point, really, the table at 2.9, just again, is just a summary of the things that we are nationally required to do in the GP access recovery plan. And there is reference in there to expanding self-referral opportunities for patients, as well as expanding the role of community pharmacy, for example.
Sarah, yeah.
I welcome your ideas about the thinking quickly about estates, particularly the porta cabin ideas. I mean, the pandemic showed how quickly things could be moved and changed, and I'm proud of the work that GPs and the team around the table, the lead, that they did so quickly, and to, you know, support patients. I've worked in practice that's had a porta cabin for years, and it works, to be honest. It's easy to clean, and yeah, so that why not? You know, if it needs to be happen quickly, that's a great idea. One more point though, we do need to try and have some influence on trying to get school nurses up and running again, because that's a huge impact on general practice. The work that they used to do has been pushed again, the left shift to general practice, and also to increase the number of health visitors again for the same reason.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Taylor next. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Most of my question comments already been asked because I was going to talk about navigation. But I've read through the report, and this report is much better than the last one that came to us. Thank you for all the work that you are doing. GPs have challenges just like any other organization, and I feel that they are doing the best they can with whatever resources they have today. I'm only going from my doctor perception. I've seen improvement in appointments and face-to-face and so on. And it's not underwrite. It's not fully on the track, but is on the track since the pandemic, which I think is good. But my main concern is the communication bit. We have navigation everywhere to go there, but please take the elderly with you. We've got apps. I'm an apps freak, but maybe my grandmom, my disability won't be. So I'm asking you, when you do communicate for everyone to understand at each levels, different languages, and so on and so on. I've met this gentleman who's coming from the chemist a few weeks ago, and he says the receptionist sent him to the chemist for some illness, but the chemist says he doesn't deal with that. They can't prescribe certain things. That's something that you need to lay out to the patient, what chemists can and can't do. And really it's just communication. And thank you again for the work you've been done during the pandemic and what you continue doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was going to take that as a comment, because I think we've talked about some of those issues. But yeah, it's really important though, the communication, and particularly making so we talk about digital leads, but alternative if you're not ready. So I think that's really
really I just think, sorry, when they coming out, remember the elderly don't understand as what a younger person, and some haven't got grandchildren or any visitors to guide them through. So please take that on board when you do take things on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Hartbrook next.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to start off by thanking everybody that works in the GP practice, both the receptionists, the nurses, the GPs, anybody else who's involved. It is a very vital service, and we know you work hard, and we want to support you in working better. I've got a couple of points that I'd like to sort of pick up. One, building on what George was saying around access is more important than appointments, and also kind of building on what Andrea was saying around patients needing to know the roles better. And I've been in a situation from a personal perspective where I've actually, looking after family members, dealt with a number of different GP practices in the East Leeds area in recent years. And the one thing I've experienced is that the quality of the reception team and their ability to triage is absolutely vital. I think that, picking up what Andrea says around patients need to know the role that they want to speak to, I'm not sure I agree with that. I think patients need to be able to articulate what they need help with, but I think, it shouldn't be for them to say, I need a physiotherapist or I need X, Y, or Z. It should be actually, from what you're telling me, this is what you need, and to direct them. I'm curious, and it might just be a point of clarification around access being more, the correlation between access and appointments, because from my own perspective, and I'd be curious if this is correct, an appointment is something where I phone up or I get in touch some way and I get an outcome. An appointment to me doesn't necessarily correlate to seeing a GP. It could be a practice nurse. It could just be I phone up and I need some piece of paper authorizing or something sending through. So it's not necessarily an appointment with a GP. It's I have contact, I get a result. And that for me is what I class as an appointment. I'll be curious as to how that's defined. There's two bits that I'd like to comment on. One, and Dr. Beale mentioned it first, patches. Again, I've got one of my family members has learning difficulties, and his practice, which is brilliant in many, many ways, tried to push him down the, can you just do it online solution? It's like, well, no, actually you can't. And I must admit, my experience with patches, it feels a bit like the kind of John Cleese's meaning of life sketch. You know, if you've got hemorrhoids before 3 o'clock and it's a Thursday, please use this system. And it just feels as though you've got to kind of, it's very time related. You know, if you're phoning up at this time, you go down this route. But actually, if it's after a certain time, there's a cutoff point for using patches in the day, which feels absurd, because if you're asking people to use an online system. And I also think there's both a digital and a literacy level of articulateness divide, in that depending on how well you are at describing your symptoms and answering the questions, really probably determines how good the outcome is. And again, that's where I really feel that receptionists have a vital role, because they can ask those open-ended probing questions if they've got the time. So I would call out, the receptionist has been, in my experience, the kind of unsung heroes of the surgery, and the ones in the Seacroft practice that I've dealt with, not for myself, are exceptional. They're really good. So I'd welcome any sort of comments on patches as to whether the way it's been, because it feels a bit clumsy, and that does build on the feeling of it being impersonal, because it's like I've experienced it, and I know family members have. You phone up, and if they're just saying, well, can you just use this system? It's like, well, actually, no, I'd like to speak to somebody about it. Not necessarily speak to a GP, but I'd just like to articulate what I need verbally, rather than having to log on and go down that route. The other area I'd welcome some comment on is the ecosystem of healthcare. You have pharmacies, you have hospitals / A&E, you have community out of hours services like the one in Middleton and others dotted around Leeds, and GPs. And people will go, if people are ill, if they've cut themselves or their kids ill at a certain time, they will go to wherever they feel is the most likelihood of getting an outcome. And I think what you see both in the media, and probably we'll experience it, to be honest, is that push-pull, sort of sometimes synergistic, sometimes antagonistic relationship between different bits of the NHS that may feel starved of resources, unfairly piling. So for example, if there isn't sufficient care for the elderly, then hospital beds get full. If there isn't, if you can't get a GP appointment, A&E wards fill up. And it's how we begin as a city to kind of, okay, look at it as a holistic big picture, to say, well, actually, we'd all like more resources, that's clear. But if you're going to put resources in, how do you spread it to get the best bang per buck for the city? Because it might be more in GPs, it might be more in A&E, it might be more in something else, but where do you perceive, I was going to say which areas are, if that's all fair to say, but kind of pulling the weight, or which areas are kind of stretched to the point where they're almost dysfunctional because of it, and which areas would benefit from actually putting some more in. So that's probably two main areas, kind of patches and that touch points between the different organisations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hartbrooke. Yeah, I think we were a pilot for the patches at the beginning of the year. So I'll give you a little bit of background in terms of how it's set up, in terms of some of those challenges that you've mentioned. So it's an online consultation tool that can allow video consultations, messages, and online requests from patients that have the capability and systems to be able to do that. So it was recommissioned across West Yorkshire for patches. It's a funded programme for practices to pick up. Some have chose to go with a different package, but majority have gone with patches. Within our PCN, we set up an online service in the extended access, using that across the whole of the PCN, and piloted that. And some of the ours roles that we've got, the care coordinators, are the ones that are daily filtering all those requests through, triaging them, making them an appointment with either a GP where it's appropriate, booking them in with the physio, etc. So coming back to your point about patients not knowing who to book into, our care coordinators would navigate that. And it's not suitable for everybody. So some still want that, a phone call or actually at the front desk, that they will come and speak to a receptionist face to face to book. And I think it's really important that we give patients those choices. So we're not expecting our patients to go down the online route. Our first patient that ever used online consultations was somebody who was 90 years old. And I actually rang them up after they completed it to ask how they found using it. And he was, it was absolutely fine, easy. So we shouldn't underestimate there's actually a lot of older patients that are actually using them more than the younger ones. In terms of the capacity for cut-off points, it's a bit of an open stream for online consultations. So where we would normally have our appointment book, you have so many appointments to offer each day. If you add an open-ended online system, you have to have the resources to be able to triage those requests appropriately. There are some systems within protocols within it, so that we shouldn't be getting patients that are sending requests through that are urgent. However, they've got quick to navigate the system and they can answer them in a way that will get them through the system. But actually, when we review that, it's an urgent mental health crisis, or it's something that our receptionist, if they spoke to them, might have signposted them to A&E urgently. So it's really important that we are safe when we are reviewing and triaging those online requests. So that's why some practices are able to switch that on and off. And the alternative, if that's closed, is that we still have the phone lines open, or they can come through. So we're not stopping access. It's just managing that safely, really. I think patches, you're absolutely right around patients knowing what it is. I don't think we were great when we started using it, sending the messages out. And partly for that, it was because it was a new system. They've been trialing lots of problems and amending them. So we're feeding back constantly as to what patient feedback is to make those changes. But they do have to log into the system and set it up. So we've definitely noticed in patients saying, I've not received that message you've sent me. They will have received a text, but they've maybe not thought it was related to the medication inquiry or something at the GP surgery, so I've just left it. So we do have to train patients and communicate. We are getting better though. I think they do talk about patches, definitely in my local area at the gym or something, they're always talking about using patches, so compared to 3 months ago. But yeah, I'll hand over to Gaynor for the other points.
Quick comment.
Quick. One, I think that the fact that you say it's actually a dedicated team that responds to the patches is quite interesting. So I haven't appreciated that. I assumed it was one of the GPs that would have been taking regular appointments that was seconded onto patches. So that's probably an important communication point, because what you're saying is effectively it's additional resource. And the other thing I would say regarding text sent out, identifying personally who it's to, because I know, for example, at one point I had 3 people that I was the primary contact for, myself and two relatives. And sometimes when text came in, it's like, I think that's for me, or I think it's for my brother, or I think it's for somebody else. And knowing who it's for, you kind of have to try and guess. Now, it did help there were different practices, but it's just from a small admin perspective. Thank you.
I think you were very sort of articulate in your description of general practice being part of an ecosystem. So we are a health and care system, and like I said, general practice primary care is one part of that. So one of the fundamental roles of the integrated care board is that integration of the health and care partnership. So recognising all of the partner organisations, all of the third sector organisations, all of the communities that we work with, having a part to play in delivering on behalf of that health and care partnership, and we align behind the goals and ambitions of the Healthy Leeds plan. And in doing that, we have a series of population and care delivery boards in the city that are made up of representatives of every part of the health and care partnership. The role of those population boards is to really understand the health needs of that population, and to then understand the resources that are being directed and spent on achieving the outcomes for the health of those particular populations, and then to increasingly start to have those conversations around, are we spending the right amount of money in the right place? Are we getting the right outcomes for the value of the money that we're spending? Would actually spending this pound here result in a better outcome for more people than spending this pound over there? And that's quite a new way of working that, say, as a health and care partnership, we've been developing over the last few years, and we're starting to see that more now as an approach that's reflected through the creation of integrated care boards, and then work that we're doing, particularly in Leeds as a place within West Yorkshire, learning from other systems elsewhere. So people might have heard of the work of people in Staten Island, in New York, and again, the way that those organisations work together as a partnership and align behind stated ambitions, and contracts are aligned, spending is aligned. So again, we're trying to develop those ways of working. But you're right, we're very much an interdependent system, and if one part of the system is experiencing an issue around capacity or demand, it's often reflected in another part of the health and care system.
Dr. George, do you want to come in?
Sorry, Councillor, you made some comments at the beginning about the difference between, I think, your appointments and access. And I think the point I was trying to get across, probably poorly right at the beginning when I had a frog in my throat, was that there's a difference between accessibility and the availability of the number of appointments and continuity and quality. And that's the problem that I personally feel, and there's evidence to say that satisfaction does not come from the more appointments that you offer. It's the quality in which you receive that, and that largely lends itself to continuity. So there's a risk with this. You also asked about how appointments are measured. There is a recognition in the system from NHS England, and part of the plans that we have across the city is for a better use of coding and data into, so with those appointments it's better clarity about what is done within those appointments. So we currently code into one of 4 different places. So it describes what the type of clinical contact was, or whether it's administrative. So none of this counts for administrative stuff. So if you send something through saying, can I have a letter for something, that doesn't count as an appointment unless that GP practice makes it into an appointment, because then they're doing it. And as Sarah is describing, the amount of non-GP appointment work is escalating day by day by day. When we lose a GP, we don't worry about the appointments we offer. We worry about the amount of admin that we will then have to manage, because you can't get a locum to do that admin. You can't do those things. So again, I think there's a focus on appointment numbers, appointment access, appointment, those things. Really, the struggle that we have is maintaining high quality staff who patients have a good relationship with, where we know that better outcomes for patients come. Patients rate that better in terms of satisfaction, and in fact staff rate that better, because we like the relationships that we have with patients, and whatever we can do to do that is better. The online consultation models, and you use the word capacity, we haven't talked much about capacity. Online consultation models are good for some people. They're good if you're a working age adult. They're good if you're, needing an administrative procedure or all those other things. They might be good if you have something simple, but fundamentally the rest of the time they're capacity management systems. That's what they're doing. They're trying to manage that. And I think it's unfair, just to point out, I think it's unfair to characterize how each GP practice uses patches or uses any of the online consultation models. We all do it differently, looking for the same answer. And the same answer is, how do we find appointments for people when we don't have enough appointments? And that is an absolute fundamental. So everything else about it is trying to expedite or manage simple problems. And we talked about people working at the top of their license, and I think that's absolutely important. And those online consultation models assist with that, and they help us to do that, but they're part of the solution of that. I think the fundamental is that we're over capacity, we're undercapacitated, over demand, and we need to, that's always the equation that we need to answer. And everything else we're describing is ways of playing at those edges.
Thanks for that. I think that's really well articulated in terms of the challenge. So thank you for that. Okay, have you got an additional point on this, Sarah?
Just wanted to say it's a double-edged sword, really. Things like patches need consult. Initially, it's difficult for everyone. It took a lot of time out for the staff to have to retrain to learn another system as well. But of course, it's horse for courses really. We want to make sure that it's for the right people, and when we, you know, our at the forefront of our minds is reducing health inequalities, and you know, people who want to still access traditionally. We're not going to. It's not anyone's intention to replace the receptionist. They're absolutely valued part of the workforce. So that, and also it will save time in the long run, because medical legally things get documented straight into the patient's records, and that saves a lot of time on the clinician's part. So just to make that point as well, hopefully it'll all balance out in the long run.
Yeah, Mo.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that if we did want to take advantage of the front door being an online option, then now really is the time, because over COVID, what we saw is everybody downloaded the NHS app. It was the most downloaded app in the UK. And so we have to take that forwards if we're going to do it. The second thing I wanted to say was my practice does not use patches. It uses AccuRx actually, and we took that as a conscious decision. There's lots of complexities around patches and AccuRx. We debate it a lot weekly as colleagues about the pros and cons around that and the process that's been rolled out. So I'm a fan of AccuRx. And the final thing I just wanted to say is that a patient should be able to contact the practice in the way that they choose. So that could be by email, it could be via patches, it could be coming to us front door, or it could be via telephone. About 3 weeks ago, I met a patient who was deaf, whose English was not their first language, and also they were not digitally literate. They put in a request that they wanted to contact the practice to make the appointment via a text messaging service. Now, although we do interact with text messages, Patches doesn't allow you to sort of go in and say, I would like an appointment, in the same way that you can call the practice or turn up. And so why should this one patient have to, if they're poorly, come into the practice or ask their younger child to call because they're not deaf and or hard of hearing? So what we did was a medical student was sitting with me and he saw the light and he said, I'm going to use this as a quality improvement project. This is a health inequality problem. So he met with stakeholders. He spoke with patients who are from the deaf community. And he also looked at the current standards in terms of what the NHS says in terms of accessibility and getting to the practice. And so we have implemented WhatsApp Business so that that patient can now interact with us in the way that they choose. So they want to get an appointment. Obviously, we have to manage the risk of that. So if they're having a cardiac arrest, we don't want them to be texting us saying we want an appointment. So there needs to be a caveat to that. A warning that this is not an emergency text messaging service, and you might not get a response straight away in the same way that you get a message via online. And we've also invited that person to join our patient participation group, where they're able to actively influence change from a health perspective, a delivery perspective. I just want to share that as a good practice. And it shows how fast and versatile and responsive general practice actually is.
No, thank you for that. It's a really good example. And I think the reality is we do need to engage with technology where it can make things better, but we need to recognize the weaknesses and the challenges. It's not like a universal solution, but we shouldn't see it necessarily as a problem either. It's got to be both. Okay, I'm going to move on to Councillor Mia France.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. And personally want to say thank you for all your hard work, and also especially to my own GP surgery. They do fantastic work. We've touched upon it lightly, but it was something that I wanted to ask. I don't know if it could be a written report later on that could give us an update on this. But as more and more GP surgeries are moving towards the modern general practice access models, which is fantastic. A lot of people from the older generation do prefer the traditional model, and we do have that. And yes, we've spoken about how the 90 odd year old and, you know, elderly people being able to get used to the technology because they've been forced to do so because of the pandemic. But we've also got a younger generation that are wanting to get in touch with their GPs or their GP surgery and so on, and they could do that via online. But we've also got digital poverty in the city that we have to really look at, and with digital poverty comes with health inequalities, and it's those hard, you know, it's those vulnerable people within societies that are getting missed. So I would like to know if you've got any information right now, what's being done about that, or if not, I'm happy to, if Chair's willing to have a report on that, really. But yeah, that's what I wanted to go with that.
We know currently we've got 54% of our Leeds population that have registered to use the NHS app. So that's one indication in terms of people using a digital tool. Like I say, we've also got the work that I described earlier in terms of the 100% digital Leeds team, and the work that we're doing to work local care partnership by local care partnership and engage in local populations. But if there's more specific detail that you want in, if that can be framed, then more than happy to bring a report back.
Thank you again. And Mo, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, you might be aware that there is a tablet loaning scheme from the library, so you can get a tablet if you don't have one. Just want to make that point if members were not aware. But you're absolutely right, Councillor, and thank you for your acknowledgement in terms of the work that GP practices do. But the people that most need care are least likely to get it. So that is what you are referring to. I think, again, 100% digital Leeds I've known for a long time, and have done some fantastic work. One of the things that they've done in our surgery actually is to digitally enable and create champions who volunteer in our coffee mornings. And so patients that come in on a Wednesday morning then can sit with one of the volunteers who have actually had that training and can then digitally enable people. So, yep, there is having the device, but then also knowing how to use that device as well.
Thank you for that. And I think what you've said already around making sure the front door remains open is a key part of solving the problem that Councillor Mir-France has questioned there. Good. Okay, I'm going to move on to Councillor Iqbal, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to speak on retention, but there was a long wait in the queue. So can I thank the team for coming here, and thank you for the report. You mentioned GP bashing. There's a councillor bashing as well, you know. It's quite normal. There is a bit of culture of people getting agitated, but it is frustrating when somebody wants to see GP and they ring the surgery at 8 o'clock, and 8:30 they get an answer saying, sorry, all the appointments are gone. And I do understand that there's immense pressure on GP practices. But then equally, I must say the walk-in centres are doing an excellent job. People do have access to GPs on the same day, which is fantastic. And some of my family members had to go to the walk-in centres. What I wanted to say is, it's a comment or just what's your thoughts? I've been with the practice for 40 years, and people have loyalty to the practices which they've been with. Maybe not the new generation, but the middle age and the earlier generation, you know, we have loyalties, and even though doctors keep changing. I was speaking to our practice, whom I've been with for 40 years, and they are very good practice. I mean, they've extended their support for cultural burial needs, issuing the MCCD on weekends, which is not part of your contract, you know. Some GPs have opted to provide that service for their patients, which is really greatly appreciated, because to help the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, some Catholics and other faith groups who want burials as soon as possible while the cemeteries, coroner's service, registrars are available 7 days a week. And it's not part of GP's contract for Saturdays and Sundays, but some practices have been very supportive, which is really appreciative, and I've been leading on some work on that. So there's been huge improvements in that. But I was speaking to one of the practice managers, and he's left. A friend of mine who I can ring on weekends, and he used to come out to issue the MCCD to the bereaved families. And he says, I'm sorry, I don't want to go in details, but it's not same anymore. You know, I became a GP and I have the passion to help people, but there's something wrong somewhere. So it's about retention. A lot of GP doctors are not willing to take practices on too much pressure, too much work. And, you know, your commitment, we salute your commitment, you're still happy to do your work. So what's wrong? How can we retain these doctors? Doctors are not taking over, becoming GP practice partners. I've seen in that practice, so many partners have left. The other comment from GP, a friend of mine, I won't mention name and I won't mention the surgery, but he's saying there's something wrong. You know, I decided to opt out and not stay as a partner anymore. So what can we do? What's the reason for this? How can we retain our doctors? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Iqbal. As I said, I love my job. So, but I think the point that you raise is really complex. There's loads of reasons why GPs may be burnt out. But I think there is a lot of investment at the moment in terms of giving people another hobby, enthusiasm and interest alongside their core general practice work. So sort of upskilling them, leadership skills, you know, GPs with special interests, so that the opportunities are wide and varied. But it is tough. We are working in a broken system, and I tell our staff that they can only do their best. They need to lead, and they need to be on the side of the patient. So it's a very difficult question to answer. And as I alluded to before, my colleagues of 2016 that I qualified with said that they wanted a Waitrose nearby, a coffee shop and a car park. It's as simple as that. You know, if I've had my car lifted away whilst I was visiting a patient. So it is difficult, but lots of different reasons. And I think the world has changed as well. And I think we have to think as GP practices and partners, working 9 to 6 is no longer, how people want to do things. And we've got a GP in Scotland that's doing telephone consultations for us remotely. I've had a GP who was sitting in Spain and able to do telephone consultations as well. That brings its challenges, because it means then I'm going to have to see the patient if they need to come in. But I think we need to be open to all options and be able to do that. And then the other thing is we should support things like, I don't know, cycle to work schemes. As little businesses, we don't have access to that sort of stuff. So if you can offer these additional things to your staff, then they're going to be happier. But lots and lots of different reasons. And pay, again, is a really, really big thing. We've got a GP that's going off to Bermuda and going to get to 3 times the salary that we could pay. I'm hearing of colleagues going over to Qatar, to Doha, because they've got a better work-life balance. An example I will give you is in Ramadan, it is very fasting period. It's really difficult to get up and go to work for 9 o'clock. If you're in Doha, you can start later and finish later, and then you're home for opening your fast. It's adjustments like that, culturally, competence, all sorts of things. So, and people in our lives are so complex now, and we have to be open-minded about that. And that is difficult if you're a small business. So I think there's lots of different reasons. Expectations are high, and people are more complex, but it's still a very rewarding job. Every week something amazing happens. I have a letter from a patient. I have a card from a patient because we went an extra mile, and that really does make it worth it.
Sarah?
Can I just add to that? Sorry, I think we could spend all day answering your question, Councillor Iqbal. This multifactorial, the GPs and are tied more and more so medical legally, and obviously having to adhere to, rightly so, their appraisal process, which is an arduous task in itself, keeping up to date, again, rightly so, having to do 50 hours learning every year, and reflecting on that. So that's just in addition to what Rose said. I think majority of GPs, if they are leaving, are saddened by that. It's a profession that they've worked hard to come into. It's not taken easily. I know GPs who've young GPs who've trained in the city and then changed to actually become a lawyer because of the pay. There's like 3 times as much than they wanted. So it's multifactorial, as I said. Thank you.
Andrew, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of add from a patient's perspective around some of the challenges for GPs is around managing the complexity of patients' health problems. And, we've mentioned about the system's broken. Patients are extremely anxious, frustrated, in pain because they're potentially waiting many, many weeks to be referred into other services that they just kind of sat on waiting for that appointment and that review. And that reflects back on the practice in terms of they need that continuing care throughout that process. So a lot of them are not generally frustrated in the day-to-day world outside, ringing the surgery, but that frustration in accessing services, getting the pain controlled, managing all the conditions, sometimes is what offsets when they come back to the surgery. And we've got a 10-minute consultation model, and patients are coming in with multiple problems, which you either address them all and then you leave all your patients wait in the waiting room and then that results in complaints, or a patient goes away and they've not got all their medical problems addressed. So we are seeing a huge increase in complaints from patients, partly because of the frustration within the system, partly because when they do get seen, they're not getting everything dealt with appropriately, but also their demands and expectations are sometimes unreasonable, and within the NHS that we've only got a finite amount of resource which just doesn't manage their needs and wants. So that does all lead on to that kind of burnout and frustration for clinicians working in primary care, and as part of that job satisfaction. But I do agree, a lot of them that do leave, they are very saddened to leave. It's not the first choice. It's down to multiple factors. I'm not sure how we resolve all those.
Thanks, Chair. I again agree, it's multifactorial. If you ask one GP one thing, they'll give you another reason. A bit of a leeway, if you will. As I said, I grew up in Leeds, and before I went to school, I used to work in a greengrocers on Street Lane and lift the bags of heavy potatoes out and then get on the school bus at 8 o'clock. And I used to get off the bus in Chapel Allerton and be a pot wash in Mamma Mia's restaurant in Chapel Allerton. I had 2 jobs whilst I was at university. I had a summer job when I came home with the Rounded Fox and worked in the pub behind the Rounded Fox. I've never not had a job. I used to do the Leeds Weekly News in the Sky Rack when I was 13 as well, doing those things. I've never not had a job. I've worked in obstetrics. I've worked in general surgery. I've worked in the busiest A&E department in the city in Leicester, in the country in Leicester. I've worked in numerous different areas. I promise you, I have never, ever worked as hard as I do now when I'm on my day job. When I'm at work on a Thursday on call from, I'm afraid it's nowhere near 9 o'clock. It's well before 9 o'clock to well after 7 o'clock, to missing the kids' bedtime, to all those things. It is painfully hard work. Andrew's hit a big thing for me on this. The mismatch between what we can provide, what patients need, and what patients want is vast. And that creates a really unhappy, unsatisfactory day. We can't provide what people want, can't provide what people need. And then when you get home, you hear that actually you're really bad at your job and you're not doing enough for people. And that is quite frankly depressing. It is not a great pace. And I'm slightly longer in the tooth than Mo, slightly grey in the hair. I have been a passionate advocate for primary care and GP. When I applied to general practice, there were 20 people for one job within Leeds. It's nowhere near that now. You are lucky if you're in the south of this city to find a GP to go into those roles, because quite frankly, no one wants to do it. But I'd also like to make the point, it's not just GPs. We keep going back to GPs. I'm not actually worried about GPs in the city. I'm more worried about the practice managers, and Andrea copes very well. But, you know, practice management retention is probably the bigger threat to the stability of primary care in the city. We've talked a lot about the challenges that reception teams have. We also got a problem with practice nurses. There's no the training platform for practice nurses coming through is absolutely, my wife's got no, really struggles to get a nurse just to work in the practice. The challenges are huge, and unfortunately, like any problem, when you've got retention, the worse the retention is, the worse the problem is, and it just multiplies and gets worse. And so again, I think for me, if we're looking for ways and solutions of working together, there is absolutely something that we can do working with the public about expectation of what the service can provide, what it should provide, and where they can get additional, and I often say better support. I think one of the conversations we've had is talk about alternative ways of getting a GP. Shouldn't be an alternative way. I always say to my friends, if you've got a problem you don't want a GP, you don't want an orthopedic surgeon, you want a physio. Why do you do that? But currently we sell physios as a poor excuse for a GP for a problem with your knee pain. There needs to be a whole conversation around that. We've got a multidisciplinary team who are better at some bits, social prescribers, all those other things that we've got that are amazing. And currently what we're describing is a system in which we don't have enough GPs. So we tell people, oh, well, you haven't got GP appointments, so you can see them, and that's not as good. And then they ring up saying, well, I don't want them, I want the GP because that's the premium service. Why am I getting, why me? Am I getting the lowest standard of service? So for me, there's an absolute, the word communication started to emerge in the conversations that we're having. Communication. Help patients to understand and expect what that is. Pre-messaging, not just sending things out saying use patches, really helping people to do that, looking at digital inclusion, looking at all those things. But it's more than that. It's more submersive. It's more, what does Look North say? What do the papers say? What do all those other people say who could be helping and being part of a solution for this city around a better conversation about what primary care looks like? It doesn't have to be the new model of primary care, as other people have said. Old primary care there was 12 years ago, there was nothing wrong with primary care. 12 years ago, the Commonwealth report said that primary care in the UK is the jewel in the crown of the NHS. It ranked as, I think, apart from one parameter, top out of all 11 Commonwealth nations. The primary care model hasn't changed. The partnership model hasn't changed. Something else has 12 years ago. And I think, there's something absolute in that. And there is something that we can do about that. We keep looking for model changes around this. 12 years ago, we were the jewel in the crown.
Thank you very much for that. I think one of the things I think you're probably inferring to sort of non-medical issues, and I imagine those present more than I can imagine in your 10-minute slots, whether that's debt, whether that's heating, whether that's housing, whether that's schooling, whether that's whatever else it is. And ultimately, there's not a medical solution to that. And so when you're talking about system challenges, it's wider than just the NHS. I'd say it's the public sector system. I'm going to bring in Councillor Firth next.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for this wider debate that's been taking place. It's been fascinating to hear and listen to some of the complex points that have been raised. I just wanted to raise a couple of points before I ask my question. First of all, on point 6.2 with the map, it shows Jessamine Cottage branch surgery in Aberford, which was closed as of way before July 2023, so that should be removed, unfortunately. In terms of also one thing that has been raised quite significantly in this meeting is the East Leeds extension, and we do welcome the work that's been done on that as one side of the East Leeds extension within my ward, and really certainly, although there is a lot of fear with the East Leeds extension, particularly with regards to having lost the Aberford surgery, that we may then lose the surgery in Scholes, and we want to do everything we can to stop that. I really do appreciate the fact that it got a specific mention in this report and has been repeatedly covered throughout. I just wanted to ask two things. To start off with, the patient journey. There's been a lot of mention today about the abuse that are received by GPs and staff within the surgeries. And I think that, as it said before, communication is absolutely key to that. And as a result, I think it was quite interesting within this report, and I think it's something to reflect on, that there hasn't been very much mention of what the projections would look like in terms of the number of patients, whether it's just actually that we're having a particular problem after the largest and most unprecedented shock to the NHS since its creation in the pandemic, or actually whether there's general population rise that's actually affecting that. Because I think that ultimately, whether it becomes also when it comes to appointments or whether it becomes to the number of patients registering, I do appreciate the situation with the GP challenge as well, but also it may help that communication in terms of people being able to realise the situation. And I was surprised that that was missing from this report. The second thing I also wanted to ask was the fact that it mentions that roughly by the end of this financial year, 2/3 of GP practices throughout Leeds, 54% already using cloud-based solutions, and 12 identified for the next transition over the next year to expand their telephony. And I just wanted to ask, in terms of those particular 12, how they've been identified, and also more generally what the plans are for the future to make that as close as we can, as soon as possible. I appreciate within the financial envelope that's provided and other factors involved, how we can get that to 100%. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Firth. Picking up your question around cloud-based telephony. So the reason that the next 12 have been chosen will be a mixture of practices who have themselves indicated their willingness to move to cloud-based telephony in a shorter period of time. That will be linked to things like their current telephony contract and how long they've got to run on that contract, and whether there's any financial implications of them ending a contract early and starting with a new telephony provider. It will link to their what they would assess their capacity be to implement and then roll out a new telephony system in respect of staff training, comms to patients. So again, an assessment of their readiness to undergo that change, and there'll also be an assessment of the capacity and how we deploy that capacity in supporting practices in a phased programme. So there would be external support required for practices who are undergoing that change. And again, the resources would be, the assessment of the resources in terms of how many practices can we move at a certain period of time, and how long is that, say, and how many waves do we need to have. So all of those factors will be taken into consideration.
Good. Okay. So I'll take the rest of the general comments as Councillor Firth. Okay. So I got to the end of the questions. I think it's quite a sobering conversation we've just had, but also it's worth noting some of the positive comments made as well, particularly from Dr. May. So thank you very much for that. I really think we've had a helpful conversation. I really appreciate you coming, and I think it's been really helpful to have outside voices at today's scrutiny meeting, and that's something that I certainly really appreciate, and I think it's really important for us as a city to hear. So thank you for coming, and thank you, Gaynor, for writing the report. I thought it was very, very helpful, very useful report. So I'm going to draw this sort of section of the meeting to an end. We've been going for sort of 2 hours since the start, so I'm going to propose we have a 10-minute break before we have our second substantive item, if that's okay with everyone, and we'll give everyone a chance to change their seats around. So thank you again for coming, and everyone else come back in 10 minutes. I'll start punctually at 22. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're back at Adults Health and Active Lifestyle Scrutiny Board. For those who've missed the first bit, we had a very long and good debate about access to general practice GPs, which I think was really helpful. We're now going to move on to item number 8, which is a report from the Director of the Public Health and her annual report, which I think is also very interesting read. You can find the papers really easily if you put into Google Adults Health and Active Lifestyle Scrutiny Board Leeds, and it's usually the first link when I do it many times. Yeah. Okay, we've got a few new people around the table since the last session, so I'll start with Councillor Cohen, and then the people at the other end of the table, please can you introduce yourself as well, and then we'll move into the item. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Councillor Dan Cohen. I am the Chair of the Children and Family Scrutiny Board. And thank you, Councillor Scopes, for inviting me along to this afternoon session.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Farah Khan. I'm Chief Officer for Family Health in Children and Families.
Good afternoon, Hannah Lamplew from my job title is Strategy and Influence Lead from the Children and Families Directorate.
Good afternoon, I'm Catherine Ingold. I'm a consultant in public health, lead for children and families within the public health team in the council.
Thanks everyone, good afternoon. My name's Emily Carr. I'm the Director of Pathway Integration, which in old money would be commissioning in the ICB in Leeds. So I'm here as the NHS rep.
Super, thank you. I think that's everyone who's joined during the break. So, okay, I'm going to pass over to Councillor Jenkins to introduce this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the Director of Public Health has a statutory duty to produce an annual report describing the health of the population and recommendations to improve this. Following a break in producing the annual reports during the COVID pandemic, these have now been reinstated, and it's great that Victoria has chosen to focus on children for this year's report as her first as Director of Public Health for Leeds. Children are much less likely to become ill with COVID-19 than adults, and they were not the main focus of protective measures during the pandemic. However, this report highlights how the pandemic has affected the health and well-being of children profoundly and unequally. As Deputy Exec Member for Public Health, I'm pleased to add my support to this report in shining a light on the health and well-being of the children and young people in our city, and the report's recommendations on what we can do together for all children in Leeds to thrive. On page 75, we note especially the importance of access to healthcare in the areas of dentistry, speech and language therapies, and mental health services. This report is particularly strong because the voices of children, young people and families and partners who work with them are central. I would recommend sharing in schools and youth centres the YouTube 4-minute film and the Children's Summary report, as they both shed light on the effects of COVID on young people's lives in the city. I should also recommend the Black Boys Joy work of Marvina Newton and Carmana School in Synergy, which is also on YouTube. Hot off the press today, it has been announced under government proposals disposable vapes will be banned to stop children becoming addicted to these devices. Leeds has been nationally recognised by the Association of Directors of Public Health as one of 4 reports highlighted as best practice. This is because children's voices are at the heart of the report, coupled with a rigorous academic approach, which together strengthens the power of the recommendations. The association has also just issued a statement on air pollution, which may be of interest. The annual report adds to the momentum of other important work we are leading in the city, including the programme we have committed to be a Marmot city and our drive to reduce health inequalities. Our Marmot mission is nothing less than a fairer, healthier society, reducing health inequities by tackling the social determinants of health. Women living in Leeds Dock, Hunslet and Sturton have the lowest life expectancy in all of England. This highlights how the gap in life expectancy between people in the most affluent and the least deprived areas is growing. That is a staggering challenge for the Marmot team and the council as a whole. So I now hand over to Victoria, who's going to share the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins, for those comments.
I think we've got a very brief slide set. So hopefully the technology will all work. Thank you, Angela. Okay, so I'm very mindful of time. I'm going to keep this presentation very brief so we can get into the conversation about the report. We will also attempt to show the 4-minute film just because as part of this slide set, technology willing, Angela. So if you wouldn't mind going back to the first slide, I'll just say a couple of points to build on what Councillor Jenkins has said in his opening comments. Thank you. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to bring this here today. It is the first Director of Public Health annual report we've had since the pandemic, and it's great to be here and have the conversation. You will have received a full copy of the annual report and also a 4-page summary that we've done for children and young people. So it's always quite a handy summary if we need a briefer report to refer to. So you've got both of those. Just a couple of points before we start. We did take this paper through the Health and Wellbeing Board in a session chaired by Councillor Bennett in July, and it's also been to the Council's Executive Board again in July. It is part of an annual cycle of reports which will now follow. So the routine will be that we make recommendations in each of the Director of Public Health annual reports, and then subsequent reports report back on the progress of last year's recommendations. So just to kind of acknowledge that will be the process we're now in, and you will see that we have reported back on the progress with the recommendations of the last report, even though that last report was produced in 2018, just to keep that kind of continuity. The other thing just to mention up front, because it may come into the conversation, is that the performance measures of progress on the recommendations of this report will be linked with the existing surveillance we do around public health measures for children and young people routinely in our public health work in the council. So there's not a different process to monitor and measure performance. It's built into ongoing surveillance. So just to flag those two things up at the beginning. As Councillor Jenkins has said, it wasn't really a hard decision to decide to make this report around really shining a light on the health of children and young people, because we were so mindful that they were never at the top of the list in terms of the risk from COVID itself. But we know that the pandemic has had significant impact on the mental and physical health of children and young people, and we wanted to understand this better for our city and start to build the collective response to that. Next slide, please, Angela. You'll see from the report that what we did is bring together a review of the available literature around the impact of the pandemic on children and young people's health, our local data on health outcomes, but essentially with what children and young people told us about their own experiences of their health and wellbeing over those years and now, and also very much listening to what professionals who work with children and young people and partners were telling us. So all of the content, the findings of the recommendations of the report are driven by this methodology of bringing all of that together and absolutely having the voices of children and young people at the centre of that work. Next slide, Angela. And I think this is the slide that we should be able to see just the brief film.
The COVID-19 pandemic had a huge effect on the lives of children and young people in Leeds.
Today, many children are still living with the impact of the pandemic.
particularly in deprived areas.
This is our story.
And the story of our families.
In our own words. In our shoes.
My great-granddad died during COVID. It was very sad and I didn't get to see him before he died. Both my parents were key workers, so I got to go to school. I did a lot of work in school, so I didn't really feel left behind. I really missed my friends. My 8th birthday was on a Zoom call, so I felt really special and really loved.
I was pregnant with James in lockdown. It was a bit upsetting because my partner couldn't attend the important parts like this scan. Once I had James, he never saw a health visitor until he was 2 years old. James, his speech is delayed due to COVID. I think because we didn't interact with other families and young children. He's got a lot of time for adults and not children of his own age group. But lockdown gave me a lot more time to spend with James and form a real bond.
We played hide and seek a lot with our dad. Dad couldn't work, so we spent lots of time with him, which was nice. My nanny died of COVID. It was sad. My little sister was born in the pandemic, but she was in hospital all the time. She was very ill. She's better now, and we can play with her, so it's great.
It was pretty sad during lockdown, but there were some good bits. Doing schoolwork was horrible, but then when we'd finished, we got to do things like workout videos and learning British Sign Language.
It was pretty depressing in lockdown. I felt like I had to grow up really fast. Felt quite detached, quite anxious for the future. I'm glad it's over now. We get to go out more and see friends, live our lives. I like to go to youth theatre. And if I get in, I like to go to Performing Arts College. Who knows what the future holds?
Thanks, Angela. So I hope you enjoy that. It's very much a kind of a trail for the report, and after we launched the report at the Health and Wellbeing Board, it became searchable on YouTube in the public domain. So if you put it in, you can share that with colleagues and families widely. One of the most rewarding parts of the process that we committed to actually sharing the film first with the families that had actually been part of helping us make it, and then we had a very impactful evening just upstairs in the library with all of the people and others on the film, and yeah, it was very powerful in terms of the stories that came out. So yeah, we wanted to bring some of that to life, as well as the report just being about data. I've got a couple more slides. I'll go really quickly through them. We through the work of the report, the analysis of the data came down to these 11 key themes. So you'll see in the report there is a section on each of these 11 key areas, and there are findings for all of these areas in terms of what we found in terms of the health and wellbeing impact for the city. And there's also a kind of a headline showcase of everything we do in Leeds around this particular theme. So what we wanted to do was present lots of the really good work that we provide, that we're really proud of across the city, across partners, as well as describing the needs in these areas. So that they're in much more detail in the report itself. And again, there's no time to go into this now, but one of the things that you'll see through the report is that we wanted to very visually present kind of key data and headlines in a really kind of graphic way. So it was easy for people to kind of see some of those kind of very clear findings of the report. And where possible, we've looked at the difference with communities across the city. Here we've been able to pull out quite a lot of data in terms of Leeds as a whole and deprived Leeds. Oh, sorry, I've moved on to the next slide. This is the data you'll have seen from the report, but it's just an example of the way that we wanted to present some of those headline findings within the report. And then the next slide, Angela, is just an example of one of the pages that shows some of the fabulous work across the city that is happening, and for each of the themes we've captured this. Next slide, Angela. Each of the themes has headline findings, so particular partners and particular boards will be interested in different parts of the report. What we've done, and this is from page 74 of the report, is pull together all of those together to give us some findings throughout the whole work. So these are the themes that kind of came through all of the report. And again, it's worthwhile. I'm sure, hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at these in detail. But there's two key messages that I'll just pull out now for this board today. That overall, we found that most measures of children and young people's physical and mental health had worsened from the time since the last report, which includes the time of the pandemic. Although that pattern is very complex and plays out differently for different indicators, but there was an overall worsening in both physical and mental health. And the second key finding across all of these is that that impact has not been equal across the city. And we know we have more negative impact in our most disadvantaged families and communities across most of the measures of health and well-being, and that we know that the most vulnerable children are experiencing multiple effects from that kind of hit from different indicators around their health and well-being. So there's a kind of a compounding effect that happens with our most disadvantaged families and communities. There is good news. There is good news in the report that we are doing some excellent work across the city. We should be incredibly proud of, and there was some positive impacts of the pandemic in terms of time with family members, which came out in the film, some of which has sustained beyond the pandemic. So the last slide points to the recommendations of the report. Again, no time to go into these in depth here. Hopefully you've had a chance to read them. But these 10 recommendations have come through from the findings, which have come through from the evidence. And these provide a way forward to how we continue to respond to this changing pattern of needs for children and young people's health across the city, building on the good work we do, but very mindful we're in a financially challenged position, and where we're having to make some really difficult decisions around services. So we very much want the recommendations to be at the heart of some of those very difficult conversations we're having at the moment. So I shall leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Victoria. Really helpful. It's great to see Beeston Village Community Centre in the video. While I'm waiting for whether members want to indicate to speak, it's interesting the impact of on children and young people. My daughter's 13th birthday was during the pandemic, and what she wanted was to be allowed to go back to school, which is she's a sort of a change from the sort of other generations, I think. So if you want to come in, I'll start with Councillor Cohen, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for this report. I suppose, not trying to simplify anything, I think most people, particularly those involved with young people in any way, shape or form, would recognise pretty much everything within the report. I think it's always reassuring when research confirms what we probably knew. I'm involved in as a governor in 5 different schools, and the impact of the lockdowns, the impact on taking young people out of educational settings, is going to be something that we're going to see, I suspect, until those young people come out. We'll see within schools until those young people come out of formal education in varying ways. As a city, we have a real focus, an obsession with attendance for good reason, and of course, therefore, where we enforce non-attendance, that the impacts aren't a surprise. The impact on, as we saw in the film, on the youngest people born during the pandemic and preschool, not being able to socialise with other young people, is going to be significant. And that's going to present different kinds of challenges as young people move through their educational and social life over years to come. But I think this is a superb report. I'm really, really grateful that you made young people the focus of this first report. Thank you.
Dr. John Beale.
Thank you, Chair. And can I reiterate my thanks to Victoria as well for a very comprehensive and detailed report with all sorts of very useful information. I'm not going to ask her questions about what's happening. Some of those are actually addressed in the report itself, but some of them remain to be addressed. But I just want to link it with 2 of the things which are on our agenda over the next few months. One is one of the 3 issues that she has mentioned was access to dental services. And I hope that we'll be able to, as well as the wider access to dentistry, pick up access and the effects of lack of access to dental services when we do our workshop on dentistry. The other one is about mental health, and looking on page 54 of the report, talking about referrals, Mindmate single point of access up by 50%, eating disorders up by 329%. I mean, the mind boggles at that. And then referrals for autism assessments up by 70%. And you mentioned at the very beginning of our meeting today that we're going to be looking at autism sometime in the near future, I think was what you said. So I just wondered whether we could make a note of some things which we hope will be addressed in that meeting. First of all, is there any indication that the referrals are going down for those mental health issues? Secondly, we've been told before that 1 in 8 children in this city are referred for an assessment of neurodiversity or autism. What I don't know is what happens. How many of those get some sort of diagnosis? What diagnosis comes out of it? What is the result of the assessment? And then what is done about it? And what is done about it not only in the NHS, and I don't know quite what the NHS can do and what it does do, so perhaps we can learn about that when we discuss that, but also, and this would obviously impinge on the remit of the Children's Scrutiny Board, What about education? Because part of what should happen as a result of the assessment, I believe, is that there should be additional support in the children's education. So what actually does happen? Is there enough finance to make sure that it can happen? And what is the result of those assessments? So not looking to Victoria to tell us today, but highlighting the things that I hope we can have presented to us when we actually have that meeting on autism.
Thank you for that, Doctor. I think, I think some of those things will be falling the children and families remit. And I guess if you're talking about mental health, one of the things that stood out to me in the report more than anything else was on page 21 of Victoria's report, which was nearly 40% of young people feel stressed or anxious every or most days, and that's like deeply concerning sort of numbers. And I do hope it's something Councillor Cohen will look at and monitor going forwards, because it is such an important and worrying statistic. Victor, I don't know if you've got any comments from what John said.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for those comments, Dr. Beale. I know Emily wants to come in as well, so I'll make some just an opening comment. We have, it feels that the three areas of access to health services were the ones that particularly stood out through all of the data and the conversations and the processes around the report. So not to say there's not many more, but these were the ones that were the most significant. And I think it's fair to say that around the mental health service access question, we're having one of the positive things that I think the report has helped with is to have a wider conversation about how we respond to this level of need. So and I think with a sort of a baseline working assumption that there's no way that NHS services can respond entirely on their own to this level of need that is being expressed through the city at the moment. So we're having really helpful conversations around, what can we do for children who really need clinical mental health services now and in the future. But how can we as a city, and it goes back to the schools survey, Councillor Scopes, around how do we actually look at mental health in a much more holistic way with all partners across the city, because we know 80% of mental health is created outside the NHS through the communities and everything we all do. So we're never going to resolve this just by more access to more services, and we don't have the funding to do that anyway. So it feels like we need much more of a fundamental conversation about supporting our young people to be mentally healthy. And for those that need it, get the right access to services. But for all of this to tip into NHS services is absolutely, just as something that we're not in a position as a system to do. So they're some of the live conversations that are being fed into conversations with health colleagues at the moment about how we prioritise need and also support much more prevention and support around working with children more generally. I'll let Emily come in. I don't know if you want to comment on the waiting lists around mental health. Emily might have something different to say. There's no evidence I've seen of them coming down. This is why we need a different solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you, Chair, for making the time on this agenda for this discussion. It's so fantastic to have this space to discuss these really important issues. I'd absolutely echo the position that Victoria has described. To pick up some of the specific questions from Dr. Beale, you've gone right to the heart of the matter there on this issue. So in terms of children who go onto that neurodiversity pathway, who go on to have a diagnosis, once we've triaged, 97% of children who are referred onto that pathway go on to have a diagnosis. That tells us that the service is seeing the right children and providing a service that's needed. However, we are working together to understand what we can do to enable children to access the support they need without the need for a diagnosis, because the partnership model that we have in place with children and families and with schools in this city is that you should have the support that you need in school for the needs that you are presenting with, whether or not that's accompanied with a formal diagnosis. So whilst, as Victoria's described, you've got a very challenged service trying to cope with what is actually approaching 100% increase in referrals across the neurodiversity pathway, we can still make sure those children are getting what they need, either in a school environment or in that wraparound environment from the community and family that they live in. Further from that, there was a question around our mental health referrals stabilising and going down. On the side of the pathway that relates to emotional and social and mental health rather than neurodiversity, that does appear to be stabilising, but I'd caveat that with, I would actually like us to see those referral numbers go up, not because that reflects a higher incidence, but because there are children that we are still not reaching. And I think we need to really be concentrating our resources, as Victoria's described really eloquently in this report, on communities that need that focus. So we have a really great pilot happening at the moment in Chapeltown and Richmond Hill, thinking about how can we use third sector organisations to reach children from ethnic minority backgrounds that we know don't access mental health support through the normal routes. And in fact, they often come to us through a criminal justice setting, which is not how we would want that to happen. In terms of what we do after a neurodiversity diagnosis, there's a whole package of support for that child, but it really needs to be on a basis of what those specific needs are. And as you've said, a lot of that isn't health-led, but some of it will be. So things like speech and language therapy that Victoria has already described in her report would be a key intervention that health needs to offer. And that's why we're also seeing pressures on those kind of services. And finally, to pick up on the financial question, this is a significant challenge, as Victoria has described, and in the present climate, not one which we can meet with ease. But I can report that we've invested an additional £400,000 this year into doing neurodiversity assessments for the most urgent children. And that funding also includes some pilot work to see how we can improve between ourselves and the local authority some of the work in schools that supports those children.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Ritchie next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I second everything that's been said about the report. It's a really important piece of work, an excellent piece of work. And I think actually the video really sums up, doesn't it? Better than words, you know, a written word. And I think the first time I saw it, even then, it's kind of emotional, isn't it? Watching some of those stories, if you think too deeply about them. I tried not to, so I didn't start blubbing. But yeah, what I want to focus on is, and it was touched on there, and it's people who aren't engaging, who aren't picking up the vast types of support and activities that are available, and many are highlighted in this report. I'm thinking particularly things like the Henry scheme, which I know is fantastic, and certainly in West we've had some funded through health, in addition to previously by the council. And one particular scheme had very low take up. And it's just things like that, getting those people onto those schemes. Now, the last Labour government had a scheme called Emma, didn't they, for encouraging people to attend college post 16, I think, where they got a small, well, a weekly allowance, I believe. And that, I think, was successful. So should we look at things like that when we're putting the funding bids up, that there is an incentive to attend these courses and what have you? Because I think they can make a whole world of difference. And then the other groups that, and it may be, I'm sure it is a result of not engaging, mental health issues and so on, but that makes a minority of people vulnerable to criminal exploitation. And then we see, you know, some destruction within our communities. You know, if people are offering an e-bike worth £4,000 and then you're going around perhaps drug dealing in your balaclavas, which we're seeing a lot of, that's probably more attractive than to them than maybe attending one of the youth provisions that were going on. So it's how we get to that cohort, get them engaged, get them enjoying all the things that the majority, thankfully, of young people do. It is only a minority, but it's quite a destructive minority. We see that sometimes in our parks. I know my neighbouring ward in Armley Park invested in their play park, and it's been set on fire twice. Now, I'm not saying it's young people, but I think the suggestion is, you know, why are people behaving like that, destroying community assets? There's a gap, isn't there, that we're not really sort of bridging, and that's a real challenge. But as I say, the report is fantastic and gives us a real focus on how to move forward and hopefully start to bridge some of those gaps.
So I think those are really significant challenges in relation to people that prey on children that are vulnerable. And in the context of post-COVID, those vulnerabilities have increased. But we're fortunate in Leeds that despite the challenges, we have a strong partnership. We have investment in locality working through our clusters, through our early help provision, through our commitment to those investments. Our youth, for example, our youth offer, our youth workers working in those communities, doing some really proactive work with young people who are at risk of exploitation, to really engage them in positive activities and have some real success stories around that. You know, we often only hear the negatives and where there are concerns, but some real success stories around working with exploitation. We were part of a pilot with Professor Carleen Furman, who is an expert in contextual safeguarding, and that's looking at risk outside of the home and how we support young people and families and professionals around understanding risk outside of the home. So that's people who will prey on young people. And as a result of that, and some real innovative work in the east of the city in partnership with police colleagues, with third sector colleagues and our colleagues in Safer Leeds, we're expanding that to across the 3 areas of the city. So we're looking at youth violence, having that locality model where partners meet, where will they talk about emerging issues, they will discuss young people that are at particular risk that we've got concerns about. They will also look at emerging themes, so that's about spaces and places. For example, you mentioned parks. There are lots of places that those who exploit children will target. So we look at a partnership approach in tackling that and breaking the cycle. And so the challenge continues in the context of the current financial challenge, also in social care, in health. There is a workforce challenge as well, and stability in the workforce. But we're fortunate we've got early help investment, and this report really captures why we continue with that localised model of support, investment in family valued and early help, and those most deprived areas, the gaps between those and other areas is quite prevalent, but that's where we invest more of our services. We've got our fantastic children's centres. There are some examples in here, but also the work in Leeds. We also have a poverty strategy, tackling child poverty strategy, and we have Thriving, which is our board that oversees the work of the child poverty strategy, because obviously all these factors are linked, and wherever we have deprived areas, children will be more vulnerable. So it's that joint up approach that Emily mentioned, and with our public health colleagues and with our third sector, that really we look at pooling our resources. You mentioned non-engagement. We look at non-engagement as why as services are we failing to engage, and that community working. We have a fantastic third sector who engage communities really well, and building on the strength of that is the right way forward. So in Leeds, that cluster working, where we have clusters of schools, of third sector organisations, funding from the local authority, from the ICB, bringing local services together, and building on that is the right way forward, and we'll continue to do that. This, like Councillor Cohen mentioned earlier, these challenges are going to continue for this cohort of young people for a long time, and for their families, mental health in particular, not just child mental health, but adult mental health as well. And so that cross-directorate working with adult services and third sector, looking about a think family approach, and how we support the whole family to tackle those issues, is where we're investing our services in.
Thanks, Farrell. I'd really like to add to that as well. I think you've answered the question really well, but also in public health, we're always trying to look upstream and look at prevention. So you'll probably know that we commissioned the Public Health Integrated Nursing Service, which delivers the 5 mandated checks to children before the age of 5. And there are different levels of service provided depending on need. So all families will get the 5 contacts, but there's a Universal Plus and a Universal Partnership Plus offer for families that have greater needs. So the children living in the families that you're talking about would get more support. And then if a need is identified, there are pathways to follow. So domestic violence, economic wellbeing, mental health. We link with the system, or the service links with the system to access further support. And Leeds has recently been evaluated by University College London, which showed that compared to other local authorities, we do really well delivering the service to families living in the most deprived areas of Leeds. So that's something we're proud of and we think makes a difference. The data that Victoria included in her presentation is always at the forefront of our minds. If we compare the Leeds average outcomes for children, comparing the Leeds average to children, a third of our children that live in most deprived communities, the outcomes are worse. So everything we do, it tries to focus on that, from services that we directly commission to services we influence, to partnership work, and the Marmot City work that has already been mentioned. We're really delighted that's focusing on 0 to 5-year-olds, and we think that will make a difference, and we're looking forward to delivering evidence-based programmes and tweaking how we work to make a bigger impact.
Thank you very much. You happy, Councillor Ritchie?
Well, thanks for the responses, but my specific question around perhaps encouraging access to the courses such as Henry, is that something we could build in an financial incentive for families?
A financial incentive is an interesting idea. We could think about that. We have looked at that in the past for things like breastfeeding uptake. I mean, our current approach is, Farah's mentioned the children's centres. As you'll probably know, in Leeds, we're really pleased that we kept investment in children's centres. That we've got coverage across Leeds, so there are Pram Push Away and the 0 to 19 service. We are mandated to co-deliver services with children's centre partners. So we try and make it as accessible as possible and target the Henry courses are targeted on the areas of Leeds where there are more children living with obesity. So we do try to reach out, but that's a really interesting point about financial incentives which we'll look into. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Firth next.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I wanted to cover male suicide because there's a lot of recommendations in this report and there's a lot of progress provided, but in my opinion there are 2 recommendations on men's suicide that don't appear to have had much blurb provided in terms of how they've progressed, and I appreciate some meat on the bone. In terms of the fact that the Leeds Strategy Suicide Prevention Partnership wants to reduce suicide in men between 30 and 50 as a priority within the Leeds Prevention Plan, and there was going to be an audit of coroner's records which would take place if it was to remain a priority, but there doesn't seem to have been any information provided of what has actually happened and taken place. And also to take forward work in terms of actually looking at men who are at high risk and looking at how we can target them for, as it mentions in the report, the new Mentally Healthy Leeds plan, but there's not much on what's actually happened since 2017 in the last report and the recommendation made, and I'd appreciate some more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Firth, for that question. The work of the suicide prevention partnership group and network and the action plan that we have as a city wasn't covered in the overall scope of this report. Obviously, this is about children and young people, whereas obviously the suicide work is all age. So even though we do have, sadly, some deaths by suicide in children and young people, thankfully they are very low, but still incredibly important to prevent. That they will be part of the work of that. Well, they are part of the work of that broader all age group. I'm really happy to bring back a separate report on that. The audit that you mentioned is being finalised as we speak. It's a report that we do on a rolling programme every few years and are kind of nationally recognised for our approach on our suicide audit in Leeds. This time we've done it jointly with Wakefield, actually, as a joint venture because we share a coroner. And that report will launch with a workshop event in the autumn. I'm more than happy to share the details and dates of that if people are interested. And the workshop will be very much involving partners in really looking at the findings of this last audit and how we actually refresh our city suicide prevention plan to meet the findings of the audit, because what we do know from that audit is that there are particular parts of the city and groups of people who are most at risk, and we have a lot of granular detail around that to have a very targeted plan. So more than happy to bring that back, Chair. That's helpful.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful, and I think it's something that would obviously be of interest to board members. Okay, are there any other questions? I can't see anyone else indicating. I think the lack of questions is a reflection of the sort of the detail in the report. So thank you very much for that. And I think this focus has been really important, and we look forward to next year's report, but also how progress on this has happened or has progressed. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so I'm going to close this item. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. And move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 9, which starts on page 97. This item, members will recall, we had a working group on Tier 3 weight management and wrote to PEG, and we've had a response from Tom Reardon and Tim Riley. I think it's self-explanatory. I think one of the things, action from this for me, is the workshop we're going to have with Tim and Tom, maybe not those two specifically, about the how the NHS funding works. But are there any other comments, questions that members want to make, or should we just take it as record? Take it as record. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks for everyone's support on that item. I thought we made some good points that should have been heard by those two. Okay, so now just moving on to item number 10, which is the work schedule. So I think the first thing to note is around we've been asked to put 2 people on a community committee working group. In the pre-meeting, we discussed having Councillor Wynne Kidger and Councillor Mahalia France-Meir. So unless members object to that, I'm going to propose that. Good. Okay. Are there any other comments for the work programme? No? Great. We'll take it as very happy customers. So with that, thank you very much for coming today. I think it's been a really important meeting. Sorry, it's been a long one. No, I'm not sorry it's been a long one. I recognise it's been a long one, but it's been really important topic. So thanks for coming. Okay, goodbye.